is, I believe it's your job to assess where he lies on the continuum.
Good way to look at it.
It'll actually start affecting other sites of the spinal cord that's not associated with tissue damage.
But we're trying to understand, how the body works as a body, not just as a system of the body.
And we're on.
All right. We are live with Angelo, the Oreo, the Nets fan today. Very nice. We have a special guest that we're going to introduce, that Angelo's going to introduce. But first things first, I want to show everybody where we're at right now. So I'm going to share my screen really quick. So what I'm going to show right now is this kid, Mickey Williams. He's a sophomore. I think he's a rising junior next year. And his attitude is like totally how me and Angelo feel, right? Let's all watch this kid. Look at this kid, freshman, over this is probably a senior. Look how big that kid is, right over him. Look at him. He doesn't care. He's cursing to the crowd. He doesn't give any you-know-whats. Look at him. He does not care. He's a freshman. He's a freshman in high school. So me and Ange are kind of in the same boat, like we're students, and whether we're getting this vibe or not, I kind of like to think that we are getting this vibe because I like the chip on the shoulder. Like, we're students, but we're really thoughtful and we are deserving of questioning conventional wisdom, So that's where we're at. So we're probably going to show that throughout the next 5 or 10 pods, but we'll see where it goes. All right. So anyways, we got a really special guest today. Yes. Her name is Chelsea, and Angela's gonna
so today the theme of today is motor learning, and we have a special guest today, Chelsea Corley. She's a certified Ramada's Pilates instructor with more than 10 years of experience teaching Pilates clients and instructors. As an instructor, she's known for her ability to successfully advance clients in their programs. She applies motor learning concepts that help her clients master and retain exercise details from session to session. She received her master's degree in biobehavioral science in motor learning and control from Teachers College of Columbia University. Chelsea currently owns her own Pilates studio in the DC metro area, and in 2020 she launched the Integrated Teaching System, which is an online educational platform for Pilates instructors to bring motor learning theories and concepts to Pilates instructors around the world. So she has a lot of experience, a lot of good educational background. And Chelsea, do you want to throw in a little bit more about yourself before we get going?
Yeah, thanks guys for having me. I'm so excited to be a part of this. And so I got certified in Pilates in New York City, and this was a long time ago. And when I first started teaching, I really realized that I didn't really understand how to actually teach people. Like what you were saying, how you're a student, but you can go against the conventional wisdom of it, right? And ask questions that's exactly what I strove to do, because whenever I started teaching people, I realized that they weren't learning the exercises and retaining any of the information or improving. And so I went outside of what was, I guess, conventionally approved in the Pilates world and decided to seek out other education to make a difference and to really learn how to actually help people. So that's
yeah, thank you for relating back to me so we don't seem so crazy pulling that video up. Yeah, appreciate that. So let's just get right into it. So can you just explain a little bit more about what Pilates is in general, so everyone gets a better understanding? Because I'm a Pilates expert, but I think no, I'm not. But for everybody, for the whole crowd here.
Yeah. So Pilates is it's a form of functional exercise, believe it or not. So it's a form of functional corrective exercises, and it was created by Joseph Pilates, and he brought it into the American market in the 1920s. And his studio was in New York City. So there was an original studio, that one burned down, but I was certified at the other original studio that he opened, which is pretty cool. And basically all the apparatus and exercises that he created back then, we still use today. So he was someone who was way ahead of his time, which is kind of amazing. And so Pilates is a form of exercise that uses equipment that's spring loaded. So it's interesting that the feedback that the body gets is different. So the weight kind of stays the weight stays the same, and you can change it with the spring loads, but they're not, some have different weights for springs, but all the springs are exactly the same. So it's a little bit different than like weight training on a cable machine, because the spring has a little bit of a different feel to it. The exercises are constructed so that it's really working on your core strength, meaning like your whole core, from like your back muscle, like the whole entire core, and just teaching you how to initiate movements from your core out. So a lot of athletes use it as cross training for their sport. And I think the thing that's so fascinating about Pilates is this guy created all these exercises. He figured out how to make all this equipment. And he was actually really thinking about motor learning theory before it was actually like a theory. So he really believed that you have to train the mind to be able to train the body. And I think that that's what I find so fascinating and why I love to teach it so much.
Yeah, no, that was a really good summary. Yeah. I think that back to Pilates, so a real focus on core stabilization while moving your extremities, and that's like kind of the foundation. And yeah, you know what, that's a really good point. That's actually really cool that, you know what, like maybe this can get periodized in with athletes, Pilates. So if their limitation is their core is too weak to be able to transfer forces, then that limiting factor is probably washed away, even though I don't know much about Pilates.
Yeah.
So can you go a little bit, I don't know if you inherently did, but can you go a little bit more into what you are certified in? So you're certified Romana's Pilates instructor?
Yeah. So
yeah.
it's going to sound a little bit like a Lord of the Rings thing. Okay. So
okay, that's cool. I like Lord of the Rings.
Good, cool. So Joseph Pilates had a studio in New York City, right? There are different elders who trained with him. Okay. And Romana was one of those elders. And so each person who's certified with him kind of branched off and then created their own like Pilates training with that person, right? So there's Kathy Grant, there's Romana, there's Leah, there's Corolla, there's other people. So now like all these different, I guess like offshootings, you could say, of Pilates kind of stem from it, but it all came from Joseph Pilates. So Romana's Pilates just means that I was certified under Romana, who trained under Joe, and he left the studio to her. So I was certified under her. She was only there for really brief whenever I was there. She eventually passed away, but she was older and kind of out of the certification part at that point, but her daughter is who certified me. So when I was living in New York City. So that's
did she do anything in particular that was different than any of the other disciples of the original Pilates?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So so everyone what's interesting is like Joseph Pilates, the way that they say that he taught, like obviously I don't know, I didn't work with him, but the way that he worked with people was he looked at the body in front of him and he was able to figure out, I'm going to put like more modern terms to what he did, right? So he could see their movement patterns and understand where their weaknesses lied, and so he would just create exercises to just fix it. Like, it's just amazing that he was like this like uber genius who was able to figure this out. And because he studied many different types of movement, like martial arts and gymnastics and boxing, and it used to be Pilates used to be more of like a man's workout. Like women weren't encouraged to do it until he was in the studio that I mentioned that burned down. The original studio was in a studio where there was a dance studio called Steps in New York City. And so all the dancers would come because they were injured. And so his wife, Clara, is the one who was like, you should really be having these women come in here and do this because they need it and for dance. So that's how it kind of got more of into a lot of times when people hear the word Pilates, they think it's a girl workout. But it really was originally intended for men. It's just the women came in and then took it over like women do sometimes, right? So so the difference is what's interesting in all the different offshoots of it, there's different schools of thought because he trained everybody differently. So there was no real certification of like, I mean, there is now, but there was no certification back then of like, these are the exercises that you learn, that you teach. Everyone had their own workout. So those different offshoots are based off of what those individual bodies needed. And that's why there's so much variety between the different elders or disciples.
So what patient, or not patient, client population, I guess you could say, do you typically see? Do you have a wide variety? Do you typically see people who are in pain, or is it just maintenance of their health and wellness?
So, it varies depending on who, on the teacher. But for me specifically, all my people are like essentially broken, and I mean that in the nicest way. But they're all people who've had, like, they have back injuries or back surgeries, recovering from surgeries. I had a woman who's had her legs reconstructed 3 times. I have a lot of complicated cases, so I do take on a lot more people who have more pain and have much more weaknesses and imbalances. And I think that's also, I think they're kind of drawn to me just because of my background, and I understand how to address their imbalances and weaknesses and help them through that because of motor learning. But I also have clients who are super healthy and they're like in their 30s. And I used to teach professional athletes too. I've worked with professional athletes before. So I have a wide range, but a lot of my population is a little bit older, but and more on like they're kind of trying to find a way between, like they finished doing physical therapy and now they're like, what next? And like, it's a big leap to go to sport from PT sometimes. So people will come to me to be able to do their Pilates, and it's kind of a nice way to get them back to their sport and have them feel a little more confident in being able to do that.
I think that's really, I really like that. I feel like a normal physical therapist or someone that's trying to advocate for their profession would say, oh, you don't have the right to treat pain, or you don't like that, you should leave that exclusively for the physical therapist. But I think that's BS, because I think that physical therapists kind of put this title out there that trainers or Pilates instructors or any other movement instructors shouldn't be dealing with pain. And I see really intelligent trainers, like Cal Dietz from Minnesota. So he's the head strength coach of a D1 program. He's a really big strength coach. He's always talking about, oh yeah, this guy needs to go to chiropractic, or this guy needs to go to physical therapy. Like, no, like he's a really smart dude and he understands the body. You can treat pain. It's not that complicated. It's not a special thing that PTs learn. A lot of it is just like load management, understanding metabolism, movement, like that's it. And I really like what I'm learning about Pilates. What I understand, it kind of embodies so many different things. You can gain strength, you can gain endurance, so many different adaptations, movement quality, and motor learning, like we're going to talk about. So
Yep. Yeah.
Go ahead.
And I mean, and to be fair, like, I mean, one of my really good friends, she's a PT, and so we do work together, right? So like when my people are having a problem, I send them to her too, because it is outside of my scope, right? So I'm definitely not curing people's pain or anything like that, and I'm very much within my realm of what I know that I'm able to do, and I'm not promising miracles or doing something outside of my scope. But I like when my husband's an orthopedic surgeon, right? So like I have like a little squad around me that I can ask questions to and to learn more, to make sure that I'm being safe with my clients. But whenever I'm in a situation that it is outside of my scope, I do make sure that they do go see a good PT, right? But she understands the values of Pilates too, and how we can work together and work through movement to help them with reducing their pain and helping them create better movement patterns to help with their pain.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. So one of the things obviously about Pilates and what your specialty is in is motor learning. So can we get just like a little bit broad definition for everybody? When we say motor learning, what are we actually talking about?
Yeah, great. So motor learning is a multidisciplinary science that talks about its psychology, its neurology, there's physiology, kinesiology, biomechanics, all sorts. It's just a bunch of different studies that are kind of lumped into this motor learning, right? And all of these play off of one another. So motor learning is learning the actual skills, and motor control is the actual like physical ability for the person to create the proper neural pathways to be able to execute these movements. And they both interrelate with one another. So someone can't really learn a skill until they understand how they're supposed to execute that, right? So that's where this research really dives into, and it's really interesting, and it talks about really how people learn movement, and not only learn movement but can transfer it and retain it for different environments and different stimuli.
And that's like the art that you posted. I saw that.
Yep.
So like
Yep.
the acquisition, retention, and transfer.
Exactly.
But wait, can you go back really quick? So motor control separate from motor learning. So are you saying that motor control is more of like a top-down thing, like more of a cortical thing that you have to understand what you're trying to get? So you need something that's, we'll talk about like explicit, right?
Yes.
An explicit understanding to then drive an implicit understanding. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we're going to get there a little bit later, but so as that relates to motor planning, so understanding which motor like motor skill that you want to put out there, that's a little bit different too.
Yeah. So like, I mean, we'll get into it too, but it's like if some motor skills like we take for granted, right? Like grabbing a cup of water. So if I were to grab this cup of water that's next to me, it's completely full. My brain knows that I need to recruit X amount of fibers for me to pick up the glass because it's heavy. If the glass was empty, my plan would be different because it's not as heavy, and I know that, right? So there are certain neurological conditions that people aren't able to tell that, or they're not able to create the proper program. And so some of it is a little bit subconscious, and I think on our daily lives, we take it for granted of like, what is a motor skill? Just even like picking up anything, grasping something is technically a skill. So, so that's what I mean by motor planning. So then some of it's a little bit more, you have to be a little more conscious of it, of like, for more of a complex skill. So like an exercise per se, you want to make sure that the muscles are firing in the proper sequence to be able to get the optimal output or quality of movement, or whatever your goal is for that.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yep. I'm really excited. All right. So we were kind of talking about this optimal theory. So there's a lot of different things going on, right? So like you said, it's multidisciplinary. So you have metabolic functions, you have physiological, you have neurophysiological, movement, biomechanics, all that, and they're all coming together. So some of that is this optimal theory, or just looking at the aspects of attention, motivation, but then you have more, to my understanding, they're more related to feedback themselves. So how would you organize it? How can we organize that better? So I'm going to pull up a little bit, I'm going to pull up a chart really fast by Dr. Michael Majak. Do you know Michael Majak?
Don't.
Do you know like his work?
Yeah, I do.
He's our dean.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. That's how I know. That's how I was introduced to this topic.
That's
so let
awesome.
me pull that up really quick. Yeah. So we have multiple different concepts that are all going to interrelate, and we're going to see how all that interrelates right now to improve our ability to learn motor skills or improve our motor performance. And to my understanding, there's a little nuance there, right? Like improving your performance and improving your skill might be a little bit different.
Yeah. So like, I think the favorite phrase that I learned from my time in my graduate degree is like, performance is not an indicator of learning. So, like if you're in a training session and your coach is giving you feedback and you're able to execute and apply that feedback, that doesn't necessarily mean that they learn the skill, because they're not transferring it to a new environment, or they're not doing it during a sport. Like during like a sport event is whenever that retention test would truly be tested, or whenever that feedback is completely reduced, right? And there's no feedback at all. That's whenever you can tell. So like in Pilates, for example, we give verbal feedback a lot, and verbal feedback is actually what my jam is. Because that's what I study a lot for Pilates, but that's what my thesis was based off of. So I have a lot more experience with that too. But basically in Pilates, we're coaching them and we're going them through that, and we're giving them the choreography of the exercise and giving them prompts and then telling them how to fix their alignment. But if you constantly just keep on giving them that feedback, they're going to become reliant on you, and they're never going to learn how to do it on their own. So in the moment, it looks like they're performing it correctly, but the reality is they haven't really figured out how to do it on their own, and they're not able to retrieve it on their own. And that's where the true learning occurs or is present. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a difference between getting that acquisition. You may be able to get that acquisition right away with different modalities, ton of cueing, maybe like tactile cueing, different stuff like that. But is that going to really show up 2 days, 5 days, 10 days, a year later? Gotcha.
Exactly. So there's different methodologies and ways that you can reduce your feedback and other things in motor learning too that will help increase the potential for that retention to occur.
Gotcha. So this is what we got. I put it in a nice little Word document. So how is that? Do we all see that? All looks good? Yeah. So this is by our dean. So this is by Michael Majak. And can we go, you want to go through this, take the lead on this a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So with everything, like there's a task, right? So whatever the person that you're trying to get them to achieve, that is the task. And the task, the performer, and the environment all play off of one another, and they all are interrelated. So the environment really affects how the performer could do the task, right? So if you were to be, let's say somebody were to walk across a walkway and it was dry outside and they're able to walk, that is the specific environment that would influence the way the performer would execute that task. Now, let's say the goal is to walk across the walkway, but there's ice all over the walkway. So that environment of the ice would change the way that the performer would have to produce that task and their motor planning for that. So that's kind of where you want to think of how they're all interrelated to one another. One is not just different. One can't just stand alone, right? They all influence one another. So with that, then if you use that example of the walkway, then they all have a plan, right? And so that's the plan of how you're going to execute it and their perception of what they're getting from the environment. That creates their action, and then they create the coordination of what they need to achieve the task. But a lot of the times too, if there's intrinsic and augmented information, so that could be with feedback as well. I'm pretty sure that's what that is there with the information. Yeah. So intrinsic feedback is something that the performer is able to tell on their own. So another example, like if somebody is going to kick a goal into a soccer goal, they can tell if they got the ball in the net or not. So that's intrinsically available to the learner. They know if they achieved the goal or not, and that is what knowledge of results is. So they know that they did a good job or they did not do a great job. The augmented feedback, however, is what comes to influence that intrinsically available information already. So let's say I go to kick a soccer goal and I totally miss it, but I don't really understand why I didn't get the ball in the net. My coach could tell me, which I don't know how to play soccer, so I'm not sure this is an accurate thing, but maybe I needed to square my hips to the net or whatever it would be, or I needed to look at the ball. They're going to give me augmented feedback on my performance that's going to help influence how I can perform it the next time. And that's your knowledge of performance.
Gotcha. So is that our aim? So we're aiming to tell the learner of the performance or the results? What do we want the most?
Well, so in that, it's a pretty discrete thing that they already know what the result is. They already know it. Right. So they would know if the ball was in or not. So it would, knowledge of results, the person pretty much already knows if they did it right or didn't do it right. So the augmented feedback is what you would want as a coach to tell them how they could achieve it. The feedback should be constructed for them to be able to achieve the goal, help achieve the goal. So then the knowledge of results would be that they got it correct or whatever the task is.
Yeah. So when I first tried to understand knowledge of results and knowledge of performance, I misunderstood it. What I first had it to be was that your feedback to the person is what I thought is that it's kind of like a motivational thing. Are you basing the success, so the knowledge is like the success, off of the result? Like, is that the successful thing, or is it actually your performance that's the successful thing? Because I got confused because I saw a study on like kids and they were having them do like a drawing task, and they gave them, and you might know this study, it's in Wolff's Optimal Theory. They gave them they either told them you are a good drawer or you did a good job drawing. So I took that as, all right, so you did a good job drawing, that's performance, or that's a good you did a good job drawing, that's performance, but it's a little bit backwards. So what I had, it was pretty wrong. So what you're saying is knowledge of performance is something that you can give feedback on.
Yeah.
And that can be done different ways. So there's different ways to optimize that feedback. And then knowledge of results is something that's pretty obvious as long as you're looking at what you're trying to do and you should understand the task.
Yeah. So like some task constraints, like at least in Pilates, for example, there isn't a lot of intrinsically available information in Pilates, which is exactly why you need a coach. So same thing for PT, I'm sure, right? Like if you're giving somebody some exercises, they might not be sure if they're doing it correctly or not. It might be kind of hard because maybe they're not watching themselves in a mirror, which is a whole other thing. But like, it's kind of hard to tell if they did the task correctly or not, or if things needed to be, if their alignment needed to be corrected or something needed to be corrected for them to execute it better. So that's where that augmented feedback of their performance can help them be able to achieve the task goal more correctly, or whatever your goal is that you want them to have.
Okay. Let's stay on that. Let's stay on this whole thing. So how can we make it, what are the different factors that play into our augmented feedback? So we have like external cueing, internal cueing. So I know like if you're going to teach movement, like, are you going to teach somebody, all right, if you're going to teach them to squat, all right, so I want you to sit your hips back, go down. When you reach parallel, bring your knees forward. Or are you going to just say, I want you to squat down, just go down and come back up? And like, how do you give feedback externally? Like, what are some things we could do there?
Mm-hmm. So what I've done, this isn't exactly like, I've pulled from a bunch of different types of research to kind of construct the way that I've found for it to work, right? So none of this has been, what I'm going to say now hasn't been tested, tried, improved, right? But it's what but this is kind of what my thesis was about with the feedback. So basically, what I typically like to do, it depends on the level of the client, right? So if it's a very beginner person, maybe they've never done a squat before, you're going to have to set the expectations and give them an external focus of understanding what they need to do with their body, because they're not going to know, they might not know what a squat even means, right? So you would do exactly what you just said. You would give them almost like a prompt of where you want them to move their body in space, giving them like a goal and a direction of where they need to move.
Can I go further on that?
Yeah.
So how I would see it is, if you want somebody to do a squat and like, all right, so to my understanding, that's a task. So squat is the task. You show them, say, I squat. Now they see me squat. All right, that's what a squat should look like. You think that would be more optimal long-term to do like an observational thing, or tell them, break it down each step, like do this, do that, like all the biomechanics that they should do intrinsically, or just something, all right, here's just me squatting, go ahead and let's move from there?
So there's some interesting research on that, and I think some things have kind of come up and changed in the research. Like it's interesting. Observational learning has kind of I feel like I've studied it. When I was looking at it, it actually showed that for true like learning purposes of redoing it, observational learning actually promotes a lot of imitation. So like your body mechanics are going to be very different than mine, right? I'm only 5'5". I'm not that tall. So the way I would squat or need to organize my squat would be very different than how you would need to organize your squat. So if I was watching you and I'm trying to imitate what you're doing, it might not work for my biomechanics. But what it does do is it gives someone the framework of where they need to move their body in space. And I think that is helpful. But I don't think that the actual visual part of the squat is what is creating the neural pathway for them to be able to execute the movement and actually go through that art of the acquisition, retention, and transfer. So that's where the verbal cueing can be really helpful in helping address what that specific learner needs to do for their body.
That's an interesting point. I think, I forget who recently was talking about this, but going back to the modeling and observational learning, when it was in the context of shooting a basketball, and someone would show, let's say I've never played basketball before, I have no idea how to shoot, and I was shown a video of someone like Michael Jordan shooting, it might not be applicable to my learning at this point. But let's say you show someone my age or a high school player shooting a basketball, I might be able to relate a little more. Is that kind of similar?
Yeah. So like there's some research that I think is really fascinating that shows that they did some studies in like the brain, and they were looking and making people watch a video of someone who's a novice and watching an expert do, like, I think it was like field hockey or something like that, some sport, right? This person's never played field hockey. They have no idea. So the cortex that lit up in their brain was their visual cortex. So they were really focusing on visually, like what was happening, what they're doing, but the motor part of their brain, the motor aspect of it was not firing or lighting up, right? So, but whenever they had experts, so expert field hockey people watching the field hockey players watch them play a game, their motor cortex is what fired, not their visual cortex. So there's something to say that if you have a lot of experience and expertise in a skill or a movement, you watching that person and modeling is going to help you a lot more as that expert, because you already have that motor program in your system and you understand how to move. It's like when my husband watched football, like he feels like he's like in the game. And I'm like, whatever. So like, it's very much like that. And when I read this article, I was like, oh wait, this totally makes sense. I get it now. Right. So like my visual cortex is firing and I'm watching the game, but I don't really understand it on a movement level, but he can like almost like experience it. And so with my clients, I know that they're not Pilates experts. So I rarely demonstrate, because I know that it's going to help them organize themselves in space. But I know that that isn't the only thing that's going to help their motor cortex light up is them moving, not watching.
There's something in so if you have a stroke or you have some type of stroke, something that like an intervention could be this thing called, you might know about it, is mirror visual feedback.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So essentially just, or like box, like mirror, like your hands in a box,
mm-hmm,
like with a mirror. So for someone with a stroke, their whole life they've known how to use, like say like their left arm, so they've already have that motor plan. Is that appropriate? Like a motor plan.
Yep.
And they put their hand in the box, and they are more easily able to pick up or light up those areas or light up that pathway. Because, and I think it's appropriate to say more easily able to initiate those pathways, because there's also things done in as far as like visualization training to ignite motor patterns, like for people that have like an ankle injury and that need more dorsiflexion range of motion, say. So when you bring your foot up, mm-hmm. They did like studies on people that were given prompts, so certain prompts about visualization and like just imagining themselves moving their ankle, right? So it's not, so I don't think it's the actual the observation itself, but more of like the observation is helping you ignite a certain pathway.
Yeah,
it's like a modality almost.
Yeah.
Okay. Very cool. Very, 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 very cool. All right. So let's see what else we got here.
Okay.
So wait, actually, no, staying on that. So observation. So we have observation for a more experienced learner. So someone who has more experience that has that motor plan developed. For novices, less observation, maybe more, and it depends on the task and the environment, like we were talking about, but less observation, more verbal cueing, because they might emulate or do different things if you try and give observational cues.
Yeah, that's
really
what
interesting.
That's what I've seen that's worked with my clients the most. And like, if I have a really stiff old man, I used to be a dancer, I'm really flexible, right? The thing too, like with this optimal theory, right? Like what's interesting about Wolf's optimal theory too is it really talks about the state of mind of the learner, right? Like their motivation. So by me looking and being flexible, they might assume that that's actually the goal of the exercise, whenever it's not. It's just because that's the way my body is, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe the goal of the exercise is for them to fire their transverse abdominals and do X, Y, and Z with that, right? And move it through and just move or find support that way. But it doesn't really matter if like their leg can touch their nose, whatever. So they, then my clients will feel discouraged because they don't feel like that's actually achievable, because it's not, because I'm not going to get that stiff man to be able to be as flexible as I am. It's not possible. It's not in their makeup. Right. And that's okay. But So I think that that's like where, you know, that motivation is really important too. And sometimes observation can kind of hinder that, because people might feel that they're not, that they're in the state that they are, and that there's no room for change or progress because it seems so unachievable, right? It just seems unattainable. So I think that's something to think about too, because when I was rereading her optimal theory, I thought that was something that was so interesting, but made so much sense to me, that people did a lot better whenever they realized that learning is a process, and that they're in this state right now, but it's going to improve, and there are steps for them to improve. But the people who were in this state of mind of like, this is the way that I am, and it's just the way it's going to be, they did not see much progress.
Yeah, no. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I was actually talking to Angelo before, like earlier today, about like how all these factors are kind of intertwined. So is it just like, all right, your motivation and attention affects your ability to increase your focus on the task, and then your feedback and all that, and how you like augmented feedback and how you teach somebody, like actually teach them, is going to affect your learning. But no, like that can actually affect your motivation and your attention. So that's kind of cool how that all interplays.
Yeah.
Something on the flip side though that I want to, like, a little counter,
Yeah.
is that, so as far as like auditory processing, so to my understanding, auditory processing will inherently require you to use cognitive control.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you have to understand what the person's saying. So now that takes that pathway at some point has to reach your cortex, right? If it's observational, this is my understanding, and I'm pretty sure that's on. So when you're just observing something and seeing something, you don't need to unravel it. It doesn't need to go to your cortex. There's parts of that pathway of your visual pathway that can just stay subcortical the whole time. Is that true? And how does that intertwine with everything else?
Yeah. So, I mean, that is totally true. So that's where I think like it's kind of dependent on the task and the level of what your learner is, and what the task constraints are, and how difficult the task is, right? So how many degrees of freedom are there in the task? Is it something that's more of a discrete task, a simple task, or is it like a super complex task that has a lot of different loads and different functions? And I think it's, I mean, I don't know personally, like, because I haven't done the research on that of exactly like how exactly they layer into one another, right? But I think that there's a time and a place for everything. You know what I mean? And yeah, but you're right. Like someone can look and learn, but it's interesting because like for example, like from like the dance world perspective, everything was visual. So like when you would learn a routine, they demonstrated it and you imitated it. But I had so many injuries as a dancer, torn labrums. Like, I mean, I was a mess because I never learned how to do the exercise correctly. So I was trying to imitate and get my leg up by my head as best as I could. And I was using my quads. I wasn't using my psoas. No one told me what to do with my body. And I just used my facility however I could to make it happen. So I think that's an example of like, you kind of need both.
I think I really like that nuance, because it really brings back in like that whole human aspect. Like this is not just like robots. You're dealing with a human in front of you, and it's not just like, oh, like this is this, or check this off, do this. Like, it's not like that. There's so many different factors, and all these things are on a continuum of like, would you do this? Maybe a little bit, maybe not. Like, it's not set in stone. And I really like that part of it, because because I feel like the way we're taught, everything is trying to be put into a box, you know? And it's good for someone that wants to put everybody into a box and doesn't want to think so much. Like, and I get that. But on the other side of it, it's like someone with diabetes. Like, all right, you have diabetes when you have like 126 milliliters per deciliter of blood glucose. But the person that is 124 is pre-diabetes. Like, no, everyone's on a continuum with everything, you know? So I like this whole aspect of it. I really do, even though it makes it a little bit more confusing and challenging.
Yeah, it does. And I think, I think you kind of, I think the research is great, and it's really interesting, all the things that they're showing, right? But I think it's really hard to pull all the research into everyday life, right? So like
Yeah.
every sport or every skill, like everything's so different. Like what's great about the studies is they are very controlled so that they can actually measure something, right? But I just think there's a lot more in the research that hopefully will be coming out too, to be able to help everybody be able to execute it. But everyone has their own different I guess part of motor learning that they're really interested in studying, right? And it's true because it's an interdisciplinary science. So all these different things even just impact the science itself, right? The psychology, the cognition, the neuropsychology, like all of it. Just so exactly what you're saying, right? Like we're all human. So it's really kind of hard to put a human in a box, just like put the science in a box.
And can you elaborate on this really quick? So also I think it would depend on the goal of the task. So I think in this little triangle, like this is off the dome. So we have task, environment, performer, but so you have the task, but what's your goal? Like, it's just like adaptation. Like, what's your goal for it? So maybe if I have a basketball player, like their main thing, I want them to be good at basketball. I'm using the squat. So their squat as a modality to like artificially improve strength and create muscle contraction and create increased muscle size, strength, power, all that. Right. So that's a task that they're doing. So one can argue, oh, the principles of motor learning show like you want to do X, Y, Z, X, Y, Z, X, Y, Z to get retention transfer. What if I don't care about that? What if the only thing I care about is acquisition and I'm going to be there every single time they're squatting regardless? And then when they're doing the task, so their goal of the task is to get some type of metabolic and physiological adaptation. It's not to be really good at that task, you know? So that's cool. And then when they're on the court, though, it's way different the way you're teaching. So maybe if I need somebody to learn really fast to squat because I need to create adaptations quick, I need them to get those patterns right away. All right, maybe I just give them a ton of feedback because I just need you to get this pattern right, and I'm going to be here and I'll constantly cue you, or I'll cue you more than I would have if your main goal was a squat. If you're a power lifter and you need to get the squat down long term and that's your main goal, then maybe you get taught a little bit differently.
Yeah. So like, if you want someone to produce the skill in that environment exactly the same, right? They need to deliberately practice it in the same exact environment every single time, right? And then whenever they're able to learn it in that environment, the true learning is going to show whenever they can transfer it into another environment. So the environment could be as simple as not practicing in front of a crowd and practicing in front of a crowd. That all kind of changes it, right? But you're exactly right. It depends on what your goal is. So like for my clients, my goal is like, it's muscular strength, but it's also quality of movement. And for like my clients, I have to focus really specifically on like how they're executing the complex movement. And there's a lot of things going on with it, right? So making sure that they're not just initiating distally and pulling with their hands, but so that they're not like bypassing all the other muscles that they should be activating, right? Because it's lighter weight. So it's really easy for them to just like pull their arms back, but like totally miss engaging their serratus and their lats and everything that they need to for that. So it depends on what you're exactly right. It depends on what the goal is. And it's going to be different for whatever the outcome is that you want it to be for your patient or whoever.
So I'm going to draw a little thing, goal, task, right there.
Yeah.
All right. So this is where we went so far for everybody, including myself. Let's summarize a little bit. So we did a little bit of this. We went over everything, sort of.
Yeah.
We did a little bit of this. We talked a little bit about knowledge of performance, knowledge of results for sure. So this is good. All right. So we went this way. And now, so we have to get here.
Yeah.
And something I want to talk about. So I'm assuming when Dr. Majak talks about perception of self and the environment, maybe that's partly at least has to do with some of those motivational things. So how about we get a little bit into the part of the optimal theory a little bit. So I'm going to pull that up now. So for everybody that is confused whenever we say optimal theory, it is a theory, and there's a research literature review by, I don't know her first name, Gabrielle Wolf, and she's done a ton of research on motor learning and especially the motivational and attentional aspects but I'm sure she's done other aspects that we've already talked about as well. She's done a lot for the field, to my understanding. So this article, this picture come from a 2016 literature review about optimal learning that she put together. And to my understanding, it's the most recent review of this that she put together. So I'll just go through it really fast. How much do you understand goal action coupling?
So that is something that is a little bit, you guys might have more to say on that.
Maybe.
I think you might.
Maybe.
So why don't you guys, and I'll see if I can chime in though, because this is what's pretty cool is since I graduated, she came out with all of this. So I just read her 33-page dissertation, like her lit review of this, like this weekend. So it was really fascinating. It's just crazy to see how the field has changed. But so you guys might be able to talk about that a little bit better than I.
You read it in a weekend. I read it in a week. So that's good. All right. So just real quick, just for everybody, so everybody's on the same page. So what she's saying or proposing and backing up with her not very variable research, like we talked about, but she's backing it up with research that she did and other people did in a big lit review, is that you essentially have, it's not just about the task itself and how you give feedback to the learner. What people miss a lot of the times is what's the motivation and the attention of the learner, right? So you have these two motivational qualities and this one attentional quality. And what ends up transpiring, as Cal Dietz would say, is that you have increased focus on the task. So you're actually focused on the thing that you want to accomplish, and you have decreased focus on yourself. So as you, for example, as you improve somebody's autonomy of their practice, so this is a part of their motivation, you'll have improved focus on the actual task itself and decreased focus on the self. When you have enhanced expectancies, so you expect more, you have more self-efficacy or more confidence in that you will do well, then that will also increase focus. If you drive a more external focus on the task, push the floor as hard as you can, push yourself away from the floor rather than drive your knees back and then bring your hips up. So external focus, that will improve your focus on the test. And this essentially will increase your motor performance. And that is a little nuance, is that will increase your motor performance, and that increased motor performance will improve your motor learning. And then there's this whole feedback loop of, if your motor performance increases, you're doing better. Like if I drop 35 points, I'm going to feel really good and my motivation will increase. Why? Because I have more enhanced expectancies to do well. Again, and this is kind of a positive feedback loop. In the article, they had a contrast flow chart. So it looked pretty identical, but instead of focus on task being here, it was self-focus, and all these things were essentially decreasing, and everything was a negative feedback, or it was still positive feedback loop, but negative outcomes. So the thing that we want to talk about is, how do you improve somebody's autonomy? Like, what is that? How do you improve somebody's enhanced expectancies? How do you develop an external focus on the task? So, and then we'll get into this whole goal action coupling, and maybe we can figure it out together. So autonomy. So can we talk a little bit about autonomy, what that means, and how we can improve it? Do you want to take the lead on that?
Me, sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So autonomy. So autonomy is something that it's actually, I find it kind of hard to, or I have found it hard to have clients have autonomy on, like, at least on their, I'm going to relate this to Pilates, but at least like in their workout, right? They want to rely on me, rely on my feedback, which is called like the guidance hypothesis. So like if you cue them all the time, they're going to rely on you. They're not going to execute it on their own, and they're not going to really realize that they can do it on their own. And they can't carry me around in their pocket all day long telling them what to do, right? So they need to develop some autonomy, or else they're not going to be able to transfer the skills that they've learned in Pilates, for example, to their everyday life, to their golf swing, or whatever they're trying to improve, right? So
I just made a great connection. I keep seeing these stupid what's it called? These sensors that you get put on your back. Maybe they're not stupid. Yeah,
No.
They are stupid. Thank you. Yes. They get put on your back and they cue you, they buzz you to say, sit up straight. So that's exactly like putting you in your pockets. It's essentially the same thing.
Yeah. So you're never learning how to actually do it on your own, right? You need this constant outside feedback reminder to sit up straight or whatever, but it's not really going to change the muscle pattern, the neural pattern for you to be able to sustain that. So a way that, you know, in the research and just like through experience too, the way of like helping with this motivation or with autonomy is by motivation. So setting your client or a patient, whoever it is, up for success and setting their expectations so they kind of understand what is going to happen is really going to help them be able to succeed and understand. So if I have a client and I explain to them, I give them external focus of exactly what they are going to be doing in the space, they are going to be it's much more easier for them to actually achieve the goal than if I just kind of like threw them to the wolves and like, try this. So they'll listen to you, they'll be able to execute that, and then that helps with their motivation. But another thing with which is the enhanced expectancies too, right? So the more they get to practice this, they'll gain more self-efficacy as they are able to as they're able to do the tasks over and over again. And I think it's kind of hard and like real, like I think that's like what the example was with the drawing that you were talking about. Yep. Like with the kids, like when they were saying like, you're a really good drawer, you're really good at drawing. I think that was where she was talking about this too. Like that helps with the expectancies. So and I don't want to say it wrong. I can't remember which one was better with the self-efficacy, if it was the
it was, and I had it wrong. I had this wrong too. I have a lot wrong. So it was the when you tell the child, to my understanding, that they are a good drawer, that they are a good drawer. So there's two types, and I have it written down. I'm not going to act like I'm like this guru over here. Let me just pull it up. But essentially, when you tell them that they are a good drawer, you don't want to do that, because what is that doing? That's saying that they have this genetic quality or this intrinsic quality that's uncontrollable, that they're either if you're a good learner, if you're a good drawer, when you drew well, that means if you draw bad, guess what? You're a bad drawer. Right. But the other group was told that they are good at drawing. So, or not good at drawing, what am I saying? That you are good, that particular drawing was good, right? So that group showed to have better XYZ. So, and it relates back to the enhanced expectancies.
Are you talking about entity?
Yes. Yes. So it goes back to the conception. So this is under enhanced expectancies. So one of the things that Wolf talks about, one of the layers of enhanced expectancies, is the conceptions of your ability. So you could either view your ability as a fixed capacity, like I said. So these are called entity theorists. So you were born with it. That's it. Zion. Oh, Zion, he's just born with it, right? He didn't do anything to get there. That's like, he was born with it. I'm not born with it. I can't get better. I could never be as good as him. Now, versus something that's changeable with practice. So that's incremental theorists. All right, I don't care that Zion has all this athleticism. You too can work on yourself, and you have the ability to amend your current situation. So those people, the entity theorists that's bad, that's what we don't want, is associated with telling someone you are a good drawer. Telling someone they're a good drawer means they're inherently good or bad. They can't change it with practice. Telling someone that was a good drawing in particular means that they have the ability to have a bad drawing, a good drawing, depending on them. It's dependent on their efforts, their capacity to change.
Right. And something else with this autonomy too that's interesting, which is a little hard, and like when I was reading this and her research, it's a little hard for me to apply it in Pilates per se, but it's interesting to even think about how to do it. It's about giving the individual some control over the environment, right? Asking them like, what order they want to practice it in, or what skills do they want to do, and just giving somebody some sense of control also helps them with that autonomy. So like with my clients, I give them homework. So like usually I would give them in a specific order because I like the order, because I think it helps like warm up the body in a right way, but maybe not, right? Maybe I give them the choice to do the exercises in the order that they want to do them, perform them in, and that gives them more autonomy. So it's interesting to read that a little bit about that.
Yeah. And something else with autonomy, just like a little understanding that you have to have. So with all the research, or a lot of the research about autonomy, there's two groups. So in a research, you have the group that you're testing, and you have the control group. And for when you're testing autonomy, a lot of times the control group is it's called a yoked group. So the yoked group is autonomy. So the autonomy group, they picked what exercise order that they wanted, just as Chelsea was saying. The yoked group is the group that gets, to my understanding, they get the same exercise order, so that doesn't change, that variable doesn't change. However, they are not the ones who chose the exercise order. So now you're trying to isolate the fact that the only difference between the two groups is that one group chose the thing and the other group didn't. And that's how they do all these things. So, for example, in basketball, for feedback, so one group chose like when they wanted to see the video. So two groups, they're shooting, and one group chose when they wanted that video feedback of them shooting. The other group got the video feedback on the same trials or the same shots or at the same time, however it was, the yoked group. However, after a 7-day retention interval, so this is just a little summary of that article, the self-control group, so the group that showed superior movement form compared with the yoked group. And I think that this was not only like acquisition, but like that this is all about retention here and transfer. So yeah, it's actually really, really, really interesting. So wait, I'll bring up, because I have them up right here, because I made a whole summary of this thing. So we can go back through it. So that example of autonomy is control over your practice conditions. So the next one is instructional language that you use. So when you use language that gives the learner more options to execute the movement, that's autonomy. If you give the learner limited options to execute the movement, that's more controlling. So is there any examples in Pilates that you would use to do that as far as autonomy?
Yeah. So like in feedback, like let's say someone's doing an exercise called the 100. It's called the 100. So basically, they're lying down. They're going to curl up their upper body, so they're going to work their upper abdominals, and their legs are going to be out on like a 45-degree angle, and they pump their arms up and down, and they breathe in for 5 counts, and they exhale for 5 counts. So it's 100 breaths. Okay. So it's a lot of muscles are working at one time, but we want them to be in a ideally you want them to be in like a neutral spine position, right? You don't want them to be in a posterior tilt. You don't want them to be arching. So if my client is tucking, I could just say, push your tailbone down into the mat. Well, that's a little controlling, right? So I could say to them, how about on this attempt, you try to bring your tailbone down or something. I give them it's the way you phrase that, right? Of it them feeling like they have the choice to take the correction or not. I think that is what they were talking about too, that allows the learner to be a part of the learning process and understanding how they're going to change their position and how it's going to feel different. And that's going to help them retain that information. My
basketball coach in college, he did something very similar. He was a smart guy. Timeouts, not all the time. Sometimes he was a dictator, and he everything, whatever he said went, and that's a different aspect. But a lot of the times he was like, all right, guys, what do we want to do? Like, what do we want to do? And I kind of adopted that with the kids that I coach. It's like during a timeout, it's like, what do we think is best here, guys? Like, get them involved. Like, it's kind of similar, even though it's not a motor skill. It's more of like strategy of the whole thing. But like, what do we want to do? Like, everybody's involved. It allows for engagement and just like thinking, and they feel, I guess they have more, I don't know, they have more enhanced expectancies, or they just feel more involved. They have more self-efficacy.
And I think they have more interest in the task too, right?
Yeah.
So like, I think that's something that's really important, is like trying to make it interesting for the person so that they're able to really go through that thought process, because that's what's going to bring them that motivation to learn.
Yeah.
And I also think going back to the timeouts, if you give them that opportunity to be involved in the strategic planning of whatever play you're going to call or whatever you're going to do, I think that also gives them an external focus as well, or not an external focus, a focus of the I guess, result of the task, rather than if you said, okay, I want you to stand here, then you run over here, and then you stand right here, you set a pick, you go over here. They're too worried about where they want to be in space when all you want to do is score a basket. So if they're involved with how that basket is scored and planning all that out, I think that's just another benefit of that as well.
Goes back to Dr. Majak. It's not what, but the why. He says that every 3 seconds. It doesn't matter if he's talking about neuro, he's talking about motor learning, he's talking about anything, kinesiology. It's not about the what, but the why. He says that like every 3 seconds, but it's true. It's not about the what, but the why. Because if you have an understanding of why you're doing something, then you're more likely to do it. If someone told me go punch a hole through my window over there, I'm gonna be like, why? No. If they gave me a reason, the motivation to do it, you understood the consequence of the action, and you wanted that, then you would go do it. I think that's simply put. Yeah.
Oh, does this also, Chelsea, in the beginning, you mentioned an explicit understanding for this implicit learning. Is this kind of where that falls in as well, giving them that autonomy?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, I don't think there's anything directly like in the research that has tied that together, right? But I think, or that I have read so far, but I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, I think that having this autonomy is a sense of implicit learning or implicit feedback, right? Because they're able to make that choice. They're able to understand what the why is, and that's going to help direct them understanding if that knowledge of results, if it was achieved or not, and how to do that.
Something else with autonomy is there's a study in golf. Simply choosing the color of your golf ball led to more effective learning.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting when I read that. I was like,
yeah,
what?
it's pretty crazy. That's pretty funny. Something that I wanted to get back to is like what people would initially think of the concepts of motor learning, even though it's not like, all right, go, and optimal theory kind of like Wolf kind of questions this in the discussion a little bit, like, do you just tell someone, all right, go do that? Like, there's the basket, go get it in there without any instruction. Like, do you do that? Will that lead to more implicit learning? But as you were saying, like the implicit learning is built on kind of a foundation of explicit information, you know? Yeah. But yes, what people would think is that this is still, though, people that don't understand the principles of motor learning would think that this is way more hands-off than you should be. I feel like people, and including myself, would think that you should give as much feedback as possible at all times and be right in their face, like tell them exactly what they're doing and they'll do it correctly. And that's how it should be, but it's not.
Yeah. So that's actually something that happens in Pilates all the time, which is why I created my online courses that I did for Pilates instructors, because people cue all the time and they over cue because they want people to be absolutely perfect, which or they feel like they can share all this knowledge and help their client. Yeah. But the reality is there's only so much attention that you can allocate to certain tasks. So if I tell someone to do 6 things at one time, one ball is going to drop. And so what's the most important thing that they should be doing that's going to fix the root problem for all those other things that you're seeing? And maybe you don't even worry about some of those other errors that you're seeing, but work on the main one that's the biggest problem, right? The biggest alignment error. And then as they get stronger or more aware, those other ones will probably actually fall away. As long as they're not going to hurt themselves, it's not that big of a deal, right?
Yeah.
So, but there's specific ways too, and the research is interesting on how to reduce your feedback. And that's something that's kind of interesting. Like there's bandwidth feedback is really common, and that's what I use when I'm teaching. And that's how I measure the progress of my clients. So if someone's a beginner client, they're going to be getting a lot of feedback, right? Because we need to set the expectations. They need to understand how they're going to move their body in space. They're going to have external focuses. They're going to have this motivation to present this autonomy. They're going to understand that it's a transient process, that they started somewhere and it's going to slowly improve. But as they get out of that beginner learning phase, then they enter more of like an intermediate bandwidth. And so you're only going to correct the things that are of the key elements, what I call the key elements, but the motor abilities that are incorrect in that. And then as they become more advanced, you probably don't even need to give them as much feedback because they'll be able to self-correct. So there is definitely a weaning off process. And what I've noticed in the Pilates world is nobody weans it off at all. So exactly what you're saying. They just try to talk and it's just more hands off.
this is exactly what Chelsea's talking about in a really complicated way, is that it goes back to the task, the environment, and the learner. You know, like this is the three-dimensional whatever theory of learning, and as different variables change, you're going to have higher guidance or less guidance or somewhere in the middle guidance, and it depends on the task, the environment, and the learner. So this is actually a cool thing that I'm doing right now. I'm just constantly copying and pasting different things into a Word document. So I like this. We're going to use this, Ange.
There's another connection I made when you were talking about, like, because you developed this online platform to teach other instructors, and something that I've noticed myself is, like, when I was in my first clinical rotation, I found myself doing the same exact thing. I was over queuing, and I was I was worried about, well, I wanted to learn, like, oh, what's the best cue for this? What's the best cue for that? How is it, well, like, so and sometimes the best cue is no cue at all. And I think all these concepts I think it's very interesting. What you did was make this online platform for other instructors, because the same principles of learning apply to teaching a similar skill. And that's like a really interesting thing, and a cool platform that you made.
And what people don't understand is, like, I have spent a lot of time understanding this. This is not simple. So this is not something that you should get from one podcast. That's why it's something that she made, like doing something like that and really understanding, especially it's so specific to, as I understand, the motor learning principles are so specific to Pilates. Like doing stuff like that and understanding how those principles apply, like it's hard. But if you can kind of like narrow it in and there's one place where you can go, that's actually really cool. I wish there was something like that for basketball. I'd be down for the count. I'd be right there, you know? So that's actually really cool. Once I learn it, I'll make one for basketball so I could share my knowledge with everybody. Okay. I think a really important point, and something that's like a vulnerability of mine, like at least to start when I was unaware of it, is that I'm trying to, it could be like an ego thing, you know? Like I think I'm so smart. I think I have all this knowledge, blah, blah, blah. And at the end of the day, doesn't matter how well I know the biomechanical implications of a squat. Like it doesn't matter, because that's not how you best teach somebody. And if I have a client in front of me, like on top of that, they don't really care. They probably don't even care. And yeah, I could make them think that I'm really smart, and maybe we have a greater like therapeutic alliance, whatever. But at the end of the day, if I'm really narrowing in on learning and teaching them how to do a squat, it's not by dispelling all my knowledge that I know about the squat. It's about where is this person at in their learning process? What do they know? What do they not know? And how can I improve them from there? Not about me. It's about the patient or client. And I think that's a common theme too. Okay, so let's continue. So we talked a little bit about autonomy. We talked about the golf ball. Just picking the color of the golf ball will make you a Tiger Woods, and enhance expectancies. What else? So enhance expectancies, we have some more things to talk about. So we kind of touched on all right, let's go through it. So we have different practice conditions to enhance expectations. So about feedback. So feedback is something that you do actually within the task that's going to help with retention itself, and it's going to help the learning process. However, feedback itself, if it's positive or negative feedback, can actually affect, like we talked about, your enhanced expectancies. It can affect your ability to have self-efficacy, which is, by the way, we didn't explain the self-efficacy is just pretty much situational specific confidence. Confidence is too generic of a term to use, that people don't use it. They just use self-efficacy. So that's that. But so they found, so do you want to talk a little bit about feedback, as far as positive feedback versus negative feedback for a learner?
Yeah. So so positive feedback is like, it kind of gives it tells them like kind of what the learner did well, right? Like I liked how you did, how it was great how you planted your heels in the squat, whatever it is, right? You're marking it, you're telling them what they did good and why it was good. That is really helpful for people because they feel like they've achieved something, they did something well. If you do too much of this negative feedback of like, you need with the corrections of like I don't even know, you can't bring your knees over your toes, or don't do this, or having a negative connotation of that. It doesn't really tell the learner how they need to move. It tells them what they can't do. And if they can only do it in that way, you're not providing them another way for them to be able to achieve the goal. So the more that you can talk about what was good and what they did well is helpful. And the negative feedback, it doesn't mean that you can't give it. Sometimes you have to, but it's the way that you phrase it. It's like, okay, that was okay, but let's try this, right? How about you try doing it this way? And that gives them that sense of choice too, to take the correction or not to take the correction, understand how they need to apply it. And that is kind of a lot of with negative and positive feedback.
And I would imagine that this also is going to vary depending on the learner. So like for a new learner, probably a lot more positive feedback. For a more experienced learner, like if you have a new person playing basketball or a new Pilates client, you're going to give a lot of positive feedback, a lot of encouragement, because you want them to keep participating in the test. That's the main thing. How many reps can you get, right? So you're going to have them have their self-efficacy is going to be higher. But for someone that already has a lot of established self-efficacy, maybe, and they're in a good place, then you could say, you know what, let's go a little bit more towards the negative side. And it's like on a continuum, like anything else.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's how I treat it, because I think, people who have a narrow bandwidth because they're more advanced, I'm going to only correct what's in error, right? To make it correct, because their movement pattern looks fine, their initiation looks fine, but maybe we can improve their movement quality a little bit like that. They don't need to know what they're doing well, because they're already doing it and they already know that. So that's where it is on that continuum. But exactly what you said, with a beginner learner, the most important thing is practice. So the only way someone's going to learn a skill is by deliberate practice and actually doing it. So if you're giving them so much negative comments about what not to do, they're not going to have that confidence to be able to try to do it, or even try to do it on their own. So when you're in that beginning phase for a new person learning a movement, being motivational is but clear, but motivational. Like, so just saying good, that's great, really nice, is like, people do in Pilates all the time, but it's absolute crap, because what's good, right? Was it good that I pointed my toes? Was it good that I hyperextended my knee? Was it good that I don't know what was good. So yeah. I think it's really helpful to tell the person what they did well, so they can retain that and know that that is actually a goal or something within that motor ability that you want them to be able to reproduce every time.
Yeah, just like being genuine, pretty much.
Right.
Yeah. It's literally that. But something that an epiphany I just had is that there's so many concepts, and we're kind of not even close. There's so many things to talk about. And if I were to apply, like, I've taught people how to play basketball, I've taught people how to squat, I've taught whatever. I've taught a lot of different things, like motor things. I have been really not so good with these principles, So just as a grand scheme of things, this is something that I wouldn't even be able to apply right away. So there's kind of a meta learning, There's learning how to learn about learning, learning how to apply these principles of learning, Yeah. So that's its own little thing that that I'm going to have to do some research on.
Yeah, no, it's like learning a skill. Learning how to teach, learning a skill. Just like we're teaching people to move, you have to refine your craft as a teacher or whatever. But as to it's what 100% takes deliberate practice.
Yeah, that's actually pretty funny. It's like a dream within a dream.
It is.
All right. So now we have this thing. So we're still in enhanced expectancy. So we just talked about positive feedback. So we have something called social comparative feedback. And essentially what I'm doing right now is I have just to go backtrack a little bit, I have a breakdown of Wolf's optimal theory, and I'm going through each thing of the 33 pages and just brief summaries of each one. So now we're on the second one of enhanced expectancies. We already went through autonomy. So now we're still in motivation. So we're talking about enhanced expectancy, social comparative feedback. So this is essentially when you're providing information to somebody that has normative data behind it. So you are better than the average person at XYZ, and maybe that'll help, maybe that won't. Do we Do you apply that principle at all in Pilates? And I've some stuff to say about this experientially.
I kind of don't, because like I mainly, like, the way that I teach Pilates, I teach one person at a time. So there's not really anyone to compare them to. And then, like, everyone's so different, and their bodies are different, their needs are different, their abilities are different, which is all great, right? But I don't do this comparison. When I was reading this, it was really interesting. I was like, I don't even know how I would actually do that with Pilates, to be honest. You know what I mean? I'm sure there is a way.
Yeah.
I just have to really think. I just really have to think about it, because, like, my clients who have neuropathy and whatever, like, it's totally like their whole plan of how they need to execute and things they can even do. It's just different. So I'm not comparing it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you could lie too. That's not good.
But I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, that's not good. Yeah. But something with basketball, like when I was trained, like essentially my trainers back in the day, they were actually, I thought they were always amazing, and they are. They're really, really good trainers. But going back, they actually somehow they knew about all of these principles because they were there. Like, I go back to it, like when I was just starting basketball, what did they do? They just loaded me with confidence. What did I want to do? Train every single day, all day long. It's like they applied a lot of these principles, and even about feedback and all that. They were always positive, gave positive connotations, like all these things that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that they also didn't do was this. They didn't give social comparative feedback. Why? Because I think essentially what's happening is you start I don't think anyone should be compared with anybody else. I think that you are where you are. Like if I had a power lifter and I said, all right, great, you can deadlift 600 pounds. That's just over the average. Like, you're better than the regular person at deadlifting, right? They were below that. Oh, you're worse than the normal person. So what is their drive? I don't think that's a sustainable motivation. You know, I think a sustainable motivation is saying, where are you today and where are you tomorrow? I think that's a better thing to go at, rather than where is everybody else as compared to you. Like, who cares? Like, it's not about that. Or else if it were, that will lead to insecurities, or it's just the wrong drive.
Yeah. Like, I keep progress notes of all my clients, and I make sure I have, like, measurable exercises. Like, it's harder in Pilates because nothing's weighted. So I can't say, like, hey, you went up in weight, like, by lifting this.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't work that way. It's more qualitative. But the exercise is it's all different, like, functional movements. So they all interrelate with one another. So as you get more advanced, there's more degrees of freedom. They're all more challenging, right? So some exercises require the same skills in a more basic level, and then you can apply them to a really advanced level. So I have my clients compare themselves with that, with their own performance. And so we keep track of their progress like that. And I find that to be helpful for them, even just for their motivation, right? Because they understand where their improvement is coming.
Yeah, this was when I was reading it as well. I agree. This was the one thing that I was kind of stumped on, like how could you implement this type of feedback? But now that we're talking about it, I think and like we said, it depends. Like, everything depends on so many other factors. It's not just one. You put people in one box, and I think let's talk about, like, an elite athlete, for example. Let's say, and let's keep it in basketball. Let's say he's in the NBA, and you use this type of feedback, and you say, okay, you had a really good year this year, but LeBron James made 15 more 3-pointers than you. So maybe that might get you motivated to work on that part of your game or something like that. So I think maybe it has a role in this context for very experienced learners.
Yeah.
It's impossible to know for any of these, because, like we said, they're highly controlled, and there's no longitudinal data on a single measure. There's on a single way of doing like applying these principles. Like, there's no way to do that. I think on the other end of that spectrum, though, Angelo, so you have this really, like, high level athlete, but then we go back to the kid that I just showed, Miki Williams, freshman. You tell him, like, who cares? Like, you're better than all these seniors. Like, go crank it on them. Like, you know what I mean? And just letting him know, like, who cares about what you think you're at this level compared to these people.
Yeah, so then again, it depends on not just their skill, their professional level, really. So he's not in the NBA, but his mindset is at that point where if you tell him something like that, he's gonna want to be better than that. So it depends on the mindset in that case.
And just to go through Wolf's stuff, despite what we think, Wolf's
Really.
research, yeah, Wolf's research says that you want to give positive normative feedback about the learner, as compared to negative for normative feedback or no normative feedback. So type of control group where you're not even including any normative data to the patient. So they say stick with the positivity, and that's probably not the worst thing of all time either to say. Another thing about enhanced expectancies that they talk about is this idea of self-modeling. So it's goes back to the lying thing. You have a video of the athlete or client or patient, and you either A, edit that video to make them look better in the task, or B, you just get rid of all the shitty videos and you just keep the ones where they were actually doing really well. And I think it goes back to, so when I was like video, like going to watch film in basketball, what we would do after a game, if we had a really bad game, it was all bad stuff. So we would just see all bad stuff. If it was a regular game where we just like we won, like usual, whatever, we win, we watch all the bad stuff first, and then we watch all the good stuff second. So there might be some mojo to that where you're trying to end off on a good note and that actually is talked about. Like you want to kind of start and end off on a good note with things, but that's later on. So Chelsea, do you use video feedback with your clients? You do? How do you implement that?
So that's part of the way that I monitor their progress. So like, I will video them doing a skill that I know that it's hard for them, right? Depending on like where their imbalances are or whatever. And then I'll videotape them, and then we work on, I give them their bandwidth schedule of feedback, I reduce the feedback, and then we do like a little retention test, and I refilm it a couple weeks later and see if there was improvement in the actual skill. So it's the same environment, same exercise, same skill. I show my clients what I don't do though, which I could, is show them, I don't want to show them I do show them the exercise of where, of the first one. I do show it to them. Yes, I do. So as I show it to them, and they're able to see, maybe the thing that's hard is they're not able to see what I can see, right? So like my trained eye, I understand what the exercise is supposed to look like. I understand the proper form I want them to be in. They have no idea because it's not as clear as like getting a basketball in a hoop, right? So, but I pointed out to them, like, see how you're collapsed in here, you're not stabilizing, or you're not finding, whatever it is, right? They kind of understand, they're like, oh, okay, sure. But then later we'll go through that feedback. I'll give them exercises that help work on this. And then during the retention, when they look at the retention, I show them the before and the after, and then they're able to notice the difference. So it's kind of, yeah.
It depends on the goal of why you're showing them feedback. Like, are you showing them the video for progress? Like, look how far you've came, like that, like this is great. Or are you showing that for actual, like to actually improve their implicit processing, like it's the purpose of the feedback. And I think for here, it's more about the actually, yeah, for more here, it's probably more geared towards their implicit processing, I would say. But yours, that's a great example, though. That's a separate thing. That's improving their motivation differently.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Yep. All right. So staying with enhanced expectancies, and this is the biggest category that Wolf has. And these are all interrelated too. It's not just like, oh, here's one. Like, it's not all blocks. They're kind of, as we talked about, like autonomy. A practice kind of it influences enhanced expectancies and so forth, and external cueing is kind of ingrained in all these. Perceived task difficulty. So yeah, I probably should have given you this whole outline too, so we could all be on the same page. But that's fine. You're doing great. Perceived task difficulty. Methods that decrease the perceived difficulty of the task by the learner. So you have a basketball hoop, you just make it wider, and the task seems way easier. So I hear telling the learner that people like them did the task well. This increases self-efficacy and learning as compared with not receiving this information. So this goes back to the normative data. So you're telling the learner that people like them are able to do this task. Like they're able to do it too. You can definitely do it as well. So it's a little bit different why you're saying it. But you're just saying like, look, like you're a 50-year-old male, like, look, that's a 50-year-old male right there. Like he's squatting. You could squat too. It's the same thing. And I think it goes, I think a really good example that just popped in my head of this is like knee pain, like osteoarthritis. Look, this person has osteoarthritis and they have no knee pain at all. You have the same thing and you have pain. All right, let's look why you have pain, and you can definitely have no pain too. And okay, so do you use this at all? Is this even usable for you in your practice? Do you use this?
So I guess the decreasing of the difficulty, like the perceived difficulty level, like I'm not going to give somebody an exercise I know they're going to fail at. Because that's just going to just crush their dreams, right? Especially if like I go up and if I were to demonstrate it and I can do it and then they can't, that's not helpful, right, to their learning process. So that's where like I kind of look at the complexity of the skills and I make sure to formulate my programming that I know that they'll be able to really achieve. I mean, they're not going to do it perfect, but it's not going to be like a complete like fall on your face like utter fail, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I program that way for sure. I mean, I don't really tell clients like, hey, I have clients who can do this, because if it's outside of their ability to actually be able to do it, then they're still going to be crushed, right?
Yeah. I think something really interesting is so you're saying like something that they'll succeed at. Something that else that Dr. Majek says is you never want to exceed the capacity of the learner.
Right.
So because that's a no-no. However, on the other side of that, something that also Wolf talks about a lot is the challenge. So the level of challenge potentiates the learning of the success. So I have this little analogy that I made up. So you have like a boat that's going to cross a river, right? So you could just sending the boat across the river, that's the success. Send the boat across the river. Putting stuff on the boat is the challenge, right? If you put too much on the boat, now you and the river and the boat sinks in the river, now nothing got across the river. If you put just enough on the boat, just enough challenge on the boat that it's still able to get across, that's the best thing. So the most important thing, of course, is that you have the success, but I think there's a threshold point, like boom, 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 sweet spot right here. Go past that, they're going to fail and you get none of the gains. You actually probably go below than what you started because they are, quote unquote, by you crushed. So yeah, that's really interesting. I have this golf study that I pointed out. So they were placed in two different groups. So obviously this was a part of the literature review. They were placed in two groups. One group, they had a large circumference around the same size hole, just like they went to a course, whatever. They had a hole and they put a large circumference, to my understanding. Yeah, they put a large circumference around it. The other one, they put a smaller one. If you got it in the large one, that was success. If you got it in the smaller one, that's success. Just get it in the circumference. But obviously, if you have a larger diameter, of a circle, you're going to have increased success because it's like widening the size of the hoop. The group for whom the larger circle was identified as a success, but it more accurately in practice and in 24-hour retention and transfer tests than did the group with the higher standard or more conservative, so the smaller circle, definition of success. And I think that's another good point is, what is our perception of success? You know, like if and this is so interesting to me, because if my perception of a success with a basketball player is winning every game, or if my perception of success is making the shot, you're going to fail a lot and you don't want to fail. The whole idea, people say, oh, you need failing to learn. That's not what I'm talking about. If you could perceive failures as successes, then you'll always win. You'll always learn. So even if you miss a shot, if you say, all right, I failed, so you failed at the task, but you still succeeded. Why? Because now you can learn from it. So now you're succeeding every single time. What's going to happen to your self-efficacy and your enhanced expectancies? It's going to go up.
Right.
So even though you fail at the task, at the goal of the task, you could still win every single time because you could learn from it. You can XYZ. Or I could say with a basketball player, I don't care if you're dribbling and the ball hits off your foot as long as you're low. If you're low, you succeeded. And that will enhance your expectancies. You just go back and do it again, but like you still passed, you know? If it was every single time it goes off your foot, you're a failure, you lose, you suck, you're a loser, then that's awful, you know? Like you're not going to want to go back and you're not going to want to train the next day, you know? So like what's the parameters of success? I think that's cool. I do. All right. So now we have conceptions of ability. Did you want to talk about anything about that? Any more words, Ange or Chelsea, on that? Conceptions of ability. Oh, so we talked about this already, about the entity theorist or the incremental theorist. So learning as a fixed capacity. So you genetic predisposition, I'm Zion Williamson, and you can't get any better or worse. That's that. Or you can get better, or you can amend your learning and your performance with deliberate practice. So we already went through that. External focus is a focus on the intended movement effect, make the shot, rather than the body movements move this way or this certain way. For you, how does that happen?
So it's interesting. Like when I was reading this, it's really hard in Pilates because like they're like fixed on an object. They're like fixed on a piece of equipment or holding a piece of equipment. It's really hard. It's hard to not have them have to internally focus to correct, right? So I try to make it as external as I can. So I'm not saying, so like in my online course, like the way that I help people like learn how to structure feedback is you isolate the bone or you have to correct the alignment first before you can fit, at least in Pilates, right? You want to correct the alignment first before you can even talk about the muscle initiation, because if you're out of alignment, the muscles aren't going to fire in the correct sequence anyways. So let's get your bony structure in the right alignment. So I have them focus on that, and they isolate that in the cue of where that needs to be in space, but they have to put an action word to it and a direction of where it needs to go. So like if you're pushing your foot into a strap, they need to understand it has to be their foot, but at least it's into the strap that's external, right? So I try to make it as externally focused as I can. It's not perfect to what's in her literature, but it's really hard to do that in Pilates, I found.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. That is interesting. It's, yeah, because the task is the movement.
Yeah. So I'm not saying like, if I say like relax your ribs, like what the heck does that mean, right? Like that's not
I don't know.
Like that's not a good cue, and that's really internal, right? But if I say like pull your ribs down into the mat, that's giving them something to actually do, and it gives them a direction, and it's external in the sense that there's a direction outside of themselves that they have to apply it towards.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if that's like exactly right. Do you know what I mean? Like an external model, but it's just very hard. It's very hard whenever the task is all movement.
Yeah. No. Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Maybe you can. Well, this isn't Pilates. Pilates is about movement, but maybe if you had some type of targets are the best. Maybe if you had some type of target that you had to hit, and you can constrain the task in such a way, constrain the movement in such a way where the only way for them to hit that target is if they moved a certain way, then that would be really hard to do and control for, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough.
It's hard.
It's hard stuff. It's hard stuff for sure. Yeah. So with things that have a lot of the studies that are done on this isn't on that. Like as far as in this.
It has like an object, right, that you're like manipulating. So it's a little easier to be able to apply that external focus. So that's where it's like, I think things depend, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gotcha.
I don't think it would work for a dance routine either. because you are the task of like moving in space. You know what I mean? It would be the
Mhm.
same. It would be the same thing. It'd be really hard. So yeah, when I was reading this, I was like, how could I? I'm like, do I do this? Not really. How could I do this? Well, I guess I kind of do it. So it was just, it was really interesting to try to think about that.
Something in golf that I know is like for an external focus is they use the club a lot of the times, like instead of saying move your arms this way, move the club, but essentially it's the same thing. You're holding on to it. It's pretty much an extension of your body. It's so I feel like that's not even that shouldn't even count as an external cue. Like you're holding it. It's a part of you. Like if you can say whatever you want, but you're still focusing on something that you're holding. It's pretty much you. It's like if you had a prosthetic limb and you said you focus on your prosthetic limb, and now that's an external cue. No, that's stupid. So okay. So that's the first part of external focus. So that's just the little background. So something about external focus, as far as the literature that Wolf describes, is she shows how you can improve your movement, not only your movement effectiveness, your movement efficiency, but also your movement form, and you could promote automaticity through this, like we kind of talked about. So it can help you move better, but it can also help you move as you're moving better and more efficiently. You can improve your firing patterns, you can improve your strength, you can improve all these numbers. So let's go through movement effectiveness. So we're talking about balance. So one thing that if you adopt a more external focus, you can improve your balance. So when you focus externally, so a lot of studies show that. I don't really like this. I don't think I even want to talk about external focus. It doesn't apply to you at all. I'm not going to even talk about it. We'll save it for another podcast. I think it's a cool realm, but it's too difficult for you to apply.
I think it has a lot of good things to it, and I think that like even in like weight training, I think that you can apply external focus in some ways, right? Like I think it's really interesting. It's just really hard in what I do, which is also interesting, right? But I do think that like the research, the things that she's saying in it totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, totally like a legit thing. It's just I don't know.
If you're squatting, if you're a power lifter and your goal is to squat as much weight as possible, for example, like they're showing that if you tell them to, instead of telling them to, all right, drive your knees back and then extend your hips, just say push the ground away from you. That will elicit higher EMG reading. Exactly. So that's one example.
Yeah.
So this is really interesting. You know what? We'll save that. That's fine. So you're gonna have to come back and watch the next one. So where are we? Where did we go? So there's two things here. We have this picture. So top picture right here. Can you guys see this arrow? Big arrow. Nice. Okay. So we have this top picture here. This is by Majak, Dr. Majak, and this one's by Wolf, right? So these are all the motivational, attentional aspects, right? But now we have all of these aspects. So we kind of touched on these, right? And these are all going to influence what? Your learning, your coordination mode, and your ability to perform, and your ability to learn a motor skill. So we talked about the motivational and attentional aspects a little bit, and we talked about some of the augmented information like knowledge of performance and results. Now let's get into the different types of actual practicing. So you're there. So it's not the context of how you're going to teach. We talked a lot about context just now. The actual content of which you're teaching. So part versus adapted. Can we go through that a little bit? What do we know about part versus adapted practice?
So so when I was looking at this, I was going through like all my research and stuff. So I might call it something different. So through part versus adapted, does that just mean like you practice a part of the skill versus like the whole skill?
Yep. So if someone's gonna do a sit to stand, it's gonna stand up from a chair. Yeah. All right. The whole task is, all right, you're leaning forward, your weight is shifting forward, you push off the chair, and then you stand up. So you could practice just leaning forward, you could practice just standing up at the end, or you could do the whole thing all at once.
Yeah. So what I call those is like these different like motor abilities, like a complex skill is made up of a bunch of motor abilities, but which you just described, right? Like transferring weight, leaning forward, whatever. So every task has its own amount of motor abilities inherently in it. Some people might be really, and they all interplay on one another. So if one of those motor abilities isn't really great or really being executed very well, it's going to impact the whole performance of the whole skill.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're able to, like, at least in Pilates, I do isolate some of these motor abilities to work on them. And then we apply it to the whole task and that whole skill. And it's helpful because sometimes there might be one part that they're just having a really hard time even just understanding what to do with their body. So by breaking it down just a little bit like that, it can be really helpful for them to practice the whole skill.
Gotcha.
But I'm not really sure. I think in the research, though, a lot of it, they do talk about, you kind of do want to practice the entire skill. So you shouldn't just be practicing just like leaning forward and then just saying like, okay, now you can stand on up, right? They have to practice the sequencing of it and how to sequence it all together for them to be able to put those different motor abilities in the right order to be able to execute the overall global skill.
Yeah. And I also think it goes back to like, what's a specific adaptation you're looking for? And me and Angela were talking about this earlier. Like, if say you're trying to teach someone how to Olympic lift, so an example of an Olympic lift is the snatch. So it's, you get down, you pick up you have a bar down there, and essentially you're just like extending your hips thrusting, you're getting the bar overhead, and then if as much as you need, you sink down into a overhead squat position to absorb that load. So what people could do, how can you break up this task? You can do shrugs with a wide grip because that's a part of the motion. You can just extend your hips. So essentially just do a deadlift. You can do overhead squats. You can do overhead presses to increase shoulder mobility, whatever the specific adaptation that you need to rid of the limiting factor within the move. So that's different though than motor coordination or motor learning. So it depends on the goal. I think though, if you think the main limiting factor is the coordination and the actual learning, I think so it depends. I think doing though the whole thing, just adopting a whole approach to it and just not breaking up the task might be better. But it obviously depends on the task, like you said.
Yeah, well, and if you look at the full complexity of the skill and you can see that they're really struggling, like maybe they really don't have enough range of motion to be able to execute that overhead press or that snatch, whatever, then you're going to have to address it because they're going to have to address that range of motion, and there's ways you can be able to do that. So yeah, I think it 100% depends. Yeah,
it goes back to the 3D thing. Yeah, with the tasking environment to learn. This is another cool little 3-way Venn diagram. It's pretty much just saying, look, we got neuromuscular constraints, we have biomechanical constraints, and we have psychological constraints. And these are the intrinsic constraints of an individual. So this is not saying what tasks they're doing. This is not saying what environment are they in. They're just saying like, these are the 3 things that an individual can be constrained by. And if we are trying to say it's a biomechanical thing, like their ability to carry out the skill, or kind of neuromuscular too, then that's one thing. But say they have other constraints, and this is all motor learning kind of plays in all 3 of these. But if they have a different constraint, you're going to have to hit that before we can keep moving on. So yeah. So say you have like a stroke patient, there's no way you can practice a sit to stand if their quad strength is a 1. Like, all right, first we have to isolate the task. Let's work on their quad strength, and then they could hopefully transfer that strength to the task. Yeah. Okay. So that's a little bit about part versus adapted. What about blocked and random practice?
This isn't. I think this is fun.
This is your thing?
No, it's not my thing, but I just find it fascinating because when I remember when I learned it in graduate school, I was like, really? Because all of my movement has been blocked, right? Like the way that I learned movement was all blocked. So like when I was dancing, they were like, you're going to practice your fouette turns. You're going to practice and they're consecutive and continual. You're going to practice those until you're nauseous, right? Like, and it's just like, you're going to go and go and go. And that's blocked practice. So how
were you at dancing?
How was I?
Yeah. Did you carry out the task well?
Well,
after all that block practice?
So yes, but the block practice didn't really help me, right? Like, because at a certain point, it's like, I'm not learning. Basically, I couldn't transfer it for the next time, right? In the research, what it shows is, like, if you're doing block practice, the learner's able to compare on their own their performance between their skill or between the sets, right? But it doesn't really inherently help them with their learning in the next time, like later in retention.
Yeah.
The randomized search or randomized practice is actually the most important. And so it's important for someone to be able to experience how to do something in different environments with different stimuli. And that's how you'll really be able to actually do the task well whenever you need a retrieve to be able to do it. So in Pilates, it is a very, there is like a system, there is a method that Joe, as we talked, created, and there is a sequence and an order. So so if you look at it from like there's like a mat workout, right? And if you look at that from beginning to end, that's technically one big block practice, even though there's different exercises inherently throughout it. If you look at it continually, that could be, it's supposed to flow into one and the other. So you could say that that's one block practice. Now, to make it more random, you can add different props of things to squeeze and hold. So you're changing your environment and your stimuli, and it changes the way you have to execute the movement. So that's how I kind of get around that with that and utilize randomized practice in Pilates.
I kind of just remember that this concept, this argument is like one of the most interesting things of like all time for me. This is like actually crazy. So just real quick. So block practice is when I'm just going to relate it to basketball because it's easier. You're on the shooting machine and it keeps throwing you to the same spot and you keep shooting at the same exact spot. And what are you doing? You're getting really good at shooting from that spot at that moment in time.
Yes.
And then we have something called, so that's like, we'll call that XXX, right? So XXX, you're doing the same thing over and over again. Then we have something that's like sequential. So you can shoot from sequential. I think this is still block practice where you go and kind of how you were describing, like it's not the same exact task, but it's in the same order. So I shoot from the corner, I shoot from the wing, I shoot from the top, I shoot from the corner, I shoot from the wing, I shoot from the top. So that's still blocked. So it's instead of XXX, it's XYZ. And then what you can do is you can shoot from anywhere on the court. So at any time, so this is random practice. So this is, I'm shooting a layup, I'm shooting a three, I'm shooting a mid-range, I'm shooting a dribble pull-up, I'm shooting a floater, I'm shooting this, I'm shooting that. I'm A, B, C, D, E, F, X, Y, W, 1, 2, 5, you know? So like you're all over the place with that. And that is actually the place where you want to go for a learner. Now, what I think is that, yes, it would make a lot of sense if you like, I was talking to my brother about this, about golf. If you wanted to get really good at a 60-yard chip shot, what should you do? Like, if you wanted to get really good at hitting the ball in general, what should you do? You shouldn't just do a bunch of driver shots, a bunch of 9-irons. You should go all the way around, and that'll give you a better global skill development for the game of golf. You'll be better at hitting a ball in general because you'll be put in a bunch of different tests. Now, if I wanted to get better at a 60-yard chip shot, I would argue that you would still want to go random practice, even though it's that one task you specifically need, like life or death in a week from now, you specifically need to get good at. I would still say, instead of just shooting that 60-yard shot, you should shoot a bunch of different shots still, even if you just need that one test. The goal for you is shooting is that one shot, that 60-yard shot. I would say you should shoot a 50-yard shot, a 70-yard, a 100-yard, different clubs, different things. And the variability, I don't know what the threshold of variability is, but that's what I would say, because I have this idea in my head, I don't know if I'm right, about triangulating a pattern that you can only do if you have randomness. So if you don't have that randomness, you won't know what the intrinsic pattern is. Why? Because you'll just know one task. But if you shoot a bunch of different shots with your club and a bunch of different angles, you'll understand the one pattern that you need. It's like sit to stands. Like if you just do it one way, all right, you'll understand how to do that one way. But if you do it a bunch of different ways, now you learn the one thing that you need to actually complete the task. And we have a really funny example, and we're going to ask you this question. Do you agree with that, by the way?
Yes.
You do agree with that. Okay, that's good. That's nice. That's good to hear. So so you know who Steph Curry is?
No.
You don't know who Steph Curry is? Okay.
No.
So there's this channel called NBA TV. They show NBA games. No. So he's one of the best basketball players, best shooter of all time. He's
Okay.
the best shooter of all time. He plays right now. And he could shoot all different types of shots, right? Like he could fade, he could like run and shoot it, he could turn around and shoot it, walk away. You don't even know what the pattern is. Like, what is the thing that he's identifying? Like, is it like you don't know what it is? Like, probably biomechanical or like something to do with angles and velocity, something that he's intrinsically, subcortically understanding. So what I would argue, do you know who Ronaldo is? Cristiano Ronaldo, by any chance? You do? Yeah, soccer player. So
Yeah.
I don't know anything about soccer, but like sometimes in soccer, they hit the ball in with their head, right? I would argue, and I think Angela would argue too, that if you put Steph, so really good shooter, he's really good at the task of getting a ball in a hoop. He could shoot it any way. He could shoot it underhand. Sometimes he does scoop layups where it goes over a bunch of people and it goes in. He does all different types of shots. He's good at getting this 29.5 size, that's its diameter, 29.5 inches ball into a basket, right? That's not the diameter. It's not in inches for, I don't know, whatever. It's this size ball. He's good at getting it into this round basket. I would argue that he would do better than Ronaldo at heading the ball into the hoop. What do you think? What do you think? You need an answer. We need an answer.
I think I'm just thinking, I guess he probably would, because he has all these different ways of executing that task.
Yeah, I think he would too. That's crazy. Because like you would think like, oh, Ronaldo, he heads the ball all the time. Steph never heads it. But Steph has the thing that you need to get a ball into the hoop, you know, like whatever it is. So he can do it any which way. He knows the pattern to do it. And I think that's so interesting, because then you have to start thinking about what's the threshold of variability, you know, like when do you say, all right, I'm not going to try to have Steph shoot the ball in with his mouth. Like that's like, what is the variability? But at the same time, you do want variability so you could kind of triangulate that pattern, because the more variability you have, the more you'll be able to find that pattern. So
yeah,
I know this is kind of like a pop-up question that we didn't really talk about, but like, what is that threshold? Like, have you thought about that before? Or is this like something that's just like weird and
No.
crazy?
I think it depends on the task, obviously, right? And how many variations are there to be able to execute the task? Like, how constrained is it, right? So like, I think shooting, like when you're manipulating an object and you're hitting a golf ball, or you're manipulating like a basketball or something, there's many different ways that you're able to execute it. There's infinite ways that you're able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I think other tasks, such as like squatting, for example, that's a little more closed chain. There's less variability. I mean, you can change what you're standing on, you can change your weight, you can change different things, but I think there's I don't think there's as many infinite possibilities, because you're not manipulating the same object. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So,
I actually have a chart for this. Yeah.
okay, great.
But you keep going.
This is good. So I think that I just think that I don't really know like how much variability there is. I think it really just depends on what the difficulty is of the task, what the constraints are, and how much degrees of freedom are there within that skill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is a taxonomy of tasks. I sent you this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This is essentially exactly what Chelsea's talking about. It depends on the task. So what about the task? What is the environment? So is it a stationary environment, or is it a environment, or is it in motion, whatever? So you talk about like is your body stable? Is your body transport? Are you manipulating objects, or you're not manipulating objects? And you pretty much end up with a 4x4, 16 different possibilities. But the catch is like golf is like over here, right? You're not moving. There's nothing going on. It's just you, the ball, your mind, and whatever. Then all the way over here, you have basketball with defenders on you, shooting a shot, different shots, different strategies, constrained by temporal constraints. Like there's a lot of going on. But I would argue that hitting a golf ball is comparable, even though it's right here on the taxonomy, as shooting a basketball with defenders on you. They're comparable. They're not, one's not inherently easier than the other. They're, even though these have less constraints of the environment and less constraints of the, like there's less things that you have to do, there are still, why is it so difficult then? Like, why can't people do it? You know, and I think it's actually pretty interesting. And yeah, I think you're right. I think that depending on where you are in this box, whatever task you're doing, we'll say where you are in this box, and depending on where you are, like for golf, maybe on that continuum, you're a little bit more towards less variability. Maybe for basketball, maybe you're a little bit more towards more variability. Maybe in Pilates, you're somewhere in the middle over here. You're somewhere in the middle with your variability.
Right.
But it is interesting, like, is the threshold based on like what would you possibly do during the task, or does it go beyond that? You know, like yes, the possibility for a half court shot is there, so maybe we can throw in some half court shots and make like that's definitely a possible shot in a game. Maybe a heading the ball in you'll never do ever in your life, which you won't, but do you still do it? Like what's the, like, you know, so it's very interesting.
I was just gonna say, like, I think the way you have to think about it too is like it's variability and what it's still like, and functionality of like what you'd be using.
Yeah.
It, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think that's the threshold is like, what are you actually going to be doing, or else it's probably
Not that helpful.
not that
it's
helpful.
do it, but it's maybe not. Maybe it's like a cool thing that you can do, but it might not be helpful in a game time kind of scenario.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so another one of these things on this little chart is unassisted versus physically guided. So like when you're not touching somebody, or when you are. So what do you think about this, especially for you?
Yeah. So this I find fascinating too. So there's a lot of different studies on so I'm going to break it down into two different things, if that's okay. So like there's tactile cueing, right? So like touching someone, and I think that is helpful to give them some more proprioceptive feedback, right? And that just gives them some more intrinsic, but also some augmented feedback, right? For you touching them and helping guide them in that way. And I use that a lot. I do use that in Pilates, but I use it, see if it helps them, and then I strip it away because I want them to be able to execute it and create the plan on their own. So like if I'm giving like a manual correction, and this might be different for physical therapy too. So if it is, then you can just tell me. But like in Pilates, for example, like there's some exercises that are like assisted stretches, or like some people they want to create hip stabilization. So they put their hand on that person's hip so that it's more stabilized while they're circumducting the other leg. Well, that's great because it looks like the person's doing it right, because now they're not moving their hip because you have your weight on it. But how's the person ever going to learn how to stabilize their hip on their own if you're holding down their hip?
You know, that's a great point, Chelsea. Because one time our teacher showed us and look, I think you can bring it back to motivation and confidence and learning. But at the end of the day, I think you should just modify your perceived success of the task. That's what I think you should do. Like,
make it easier.
Yeah, just make it easier, or just say it's okay that you can't do the task. Like, you're still going to succeed. Why? You're going to learn, because this is how we learn. You have to fail the task, but you're still winning at the end of the day. But our teacher, I think it exceeded the boundaries of it, is that she showed us a video of her. She's our neuro teacher, of her. Oh, and she actually, you wouldn't like her, because I brought up the fact that we were watching, and I'll just say I really just don't care because she's wiling. We were watching a person walk with a prosthesis, and she was getting so nitpicky with all the biomechanics, like, oh, his dorsiflexion's like 3 degrees off, this, that. And the guy just looked scared to walk. This is a brand new prosthesis. And I kept bringing that up, despite the fact I just started reading optimal theory, but I kept bringing it back to the dude just looked scared. I honestly think that we should be really looking at, like, what is his, like, is he scared? Like, I think that's the biggest limiting factor, because once you crush that, maybe everything else unfolds. And what she ended up saying is that, let's just assume everybody learns the same. And I was like, oh my God. She's our neuro teacher.
Wow.
So Dr. Majak would not like that if I told him, or if he listens to this. So, yeah, that needed to get brought up.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that the perceived success is really important, because you don't want to, one thing that she did was she showed us a video of her treating a patient, and she just put their arm on like a roller, like one of those, like a roller thing, whatever. And she was just like having her arm move, and just so that she could, I guess, she didn't even talk about anything about motivation. She was just saying, oh, look, she's moving her arm. No, she's not moving her arm. You're probably pushing her arm, and she's on something, she's not going against gravity, and she's not doing anything like as far as muscle activation. So what is she doing? So I think that goes back to that too. It's interesting.
Yeah. So like what it says in the research is like, if you physically guide somebody, they are not going through the process of figuring out how they need to systematically move their body to achieve the goal. So like they rely on you to do it. And so like you're doing it for them. They never created that pattern on how to do it on their own. So this is something that comes up in Pilates all the time. And Pilates instructors like always, it's like, well, I can just tell them what to do with my hands. I'm like, you're doing it for them. Like, so, and then they get confused as to why their clients aren't improving, or they make the same mistakes all the time. Like, cause you're never addressing it, because they're not learning what to do because you were doing it for them. So, that is one thing that I really think it's interesting, because it's really easy to just put your hands on there and just try to fix it and make it look right. But they kind of need to go through the wonky process of it not being great, and that's okay, because they have to learn what they need to do to improve it, and then also to increase their muscular strength too, to actually be able to execute it. Sometimes it's that too, right? It depends. Is it the firing sequence that's not correct, or is it that they have a structural, like muscular weakness there that they need to address? So if you're manually moving them, you'll never know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and another, like, you can apply the same principle to like the use of braces, for example, with a lot of injuries and stuff. Like a lot of people will just, their back isn't aligned right. Okay, let's give them a back brace. Like, what's that going to do at the tissue level? The muscle is not going to learn how to naturally align your spine itself. And so it's the same thing, like whether the learner isn't going to learn itself, or whether the muscle isn't going to adapt to getting stronger, or at least just activating in that case. But yeah, it's like the same principle.
Yeah, it's like orthotics. Like, it happens with orthotics too. Like, people's feet get really super weak because they rely on the support from their foot, and now their arches don't have to do the work, and now they have really weak feet. Exactly.
And to be fair, I think that it's like everything else, it definitely depends.
Yeah.
And like, at what point do you promote compensation, and what point do you try and get rid of compensation and do it yourself? We're in peds right now. I have no interest in pediatrics, but something interesting is that something that you can do for a child that has, say, like low tone, they're not able to move their arm because they're like pretty much flaccid. It's like flaccid paralysis. They can't move their upper extremity. What you can do is do a constraint therapy. So that's essentially, you're just tying their other good arm, and they're making them use their right arm as much as you possibly can. Yeah. So what we're saying is, like, that's the thing you want to do. Stop letting them compensate. But then on the other end, say that they won't be able to do that thing without the compensation. So now maybe you can get to some of the motivational aspects of learning too, or maybe you just need to do that thing. Like, you just need to do that, like, what if you can't do that? Then that might be an issue. So I agree, but at the same time, I think that there's specific situations where you should look the other way. And do the other thing.
I mean, and it's like, this is like kind of down a different rabbit hole just a little bit, but it's like kids who have like cerebral palsy or something, like their makeup of what their motor plan is totally different than somebody else, right? So like the way that they are able to execute tasks, that's just going to be how they need to do it, because that's the way that their motor plan is mapped, right? So I think that there's something to like really think about that. Like we all have different ways of qualities of how we move, and we kind of have to honor that a little bit, right? It might not look perfect, but by us physically moving somebody into an alignment or to a position that we deem as being correct or whatever it is, that might not be right for that body. So I think that's another reason why using manual corrections or physically moving somebody into a certain space. And I'm not talking about like therapy, like obviously for certain therapeutic things for PT, you absolutely have to do that, like distraction and other things. I don't mean it like that, but I just mean in movement, in at least like in training movement and learning movement, right? We just kind of have to honor how that neural map is kind of structured.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ange.
No, I was gonna say I think you're pretty spot on. I don't think it even depends on if it's a physical therapy context either. I think it's the same thing. And I think that might be an issue with some people in the physical therapy context or the realms, because let's take that same example, someone with a kid with cerebral palsy, we just have to acknowledge the fact that they're just going to move differently. Like we can't be worried about their knee flexion range of motion during swing phase of gait, like, because all those numbers are compared to typically developing children. You know what I mean? So I think that's spot on in this field as well.
I think that the variability is the perfection, you know, like you want variability. That is optimizing movement, you know? So when people say, oh, you fucked up a little bit, you got to fix that. Like, no, you want a little bit of a variability. Why? It goes a little bit back to the finding the pattern. You don't need to do it the same way every single time. It goes also on the other side of it. It goes to overuse injuries. If you do it the same way every single time, you're screwed. Like you're going to get hurt. Yeah, but back to distraction. I know we've been on this for 2 hours. You could sign off whenever you want while I'm speaking, but back to distraction. Like you're talking about like manual therapy. I just want to just for 2 seconds, like you have to see what you're doing. What adaptation do you want? So as far as distraction, all right, there may not be anything going on actually anything going on at all at the musculoskeletal level. Like you're not really doing anything, you know? So if you are, it's very minor. And the biggest thing that you're doing, you're giving a time window, you're decreasing pain for a certain amount of time. And that itself will increase somebody's range of motion, whatever your goal is. But there's probably not anything going on. The research doesn't support anything going on actually at the tissue level. Mm-hmm. But then if you look at the negative, so you're thinking like, oh, I definitely want to improve this person's range of motion. So I'm no reason why you can't do distraction. Great. But then if you look on the other side of it, if you look at how is this going to affect somebody's perception of themselves, you know? So if you put your hands on somebody and you say, all right, I have to fix you. Why do you need to be fixed? Because you're broken. Now, where are you going? You're going towards an area of I'm broken. I'm not good enough. I need to be fixed. I'm in pain because of something structural, and you keep promoting that idea, you know? So it's like everything that you do doesn't just affect one thing. It affects everything, you know? And that's part of my problem. And that's part of the reason why I said in the beginning, why don't give the cred to the physical therapist so much, because at the end of the day, they're not doing anything special. And everybody wants to advocate for their own thing, whatever they do. But at the end of the day, a lot of what we do and a lot of what we learn isn't backed. It's not backed by anything. It's to be unique. And I feel like a lot of people try and be unique and special, but at the end of the day, it's not about that. It's about the person in front of you and what's best for that person. Yeah. You know? So it's definitely really interesting. We definitely have to speed things up. I want to talk a little bit about. We're going to skip the neurophys. We'll get into that another time. Unless you want to talk about that, but we definitely don't have to. So motor planning, really quick. So motor planning this is the last thing we'll talk about. How do we look at the differences of teaching someone a motor plan? So which motor skill are they going to employ in this specific situation? So I have a basketball player, I have a guy in front of me, depending on their position in space, visual, motor, I'm creating a skill. How do I develop their ability to strategize what skill they're going to use in specific situations? Is that different from learning? Like what do we from like skill learning, or is it probably the same thing?
I think it's the same thing. So like technically, like if you look up like the terminology of like motor planning by definition is the capacity to plan the necessary steps to achieve purposeful movements. So not necessarily the skill, right? So like when we were talking about like the picking up a cup of water, like that's a motor plan. So and that is affected by like the sensory process involved of like the proprioception, the vestibular, like all the things that you're saying, right, and vision. And that's where you're able to formulate that mental sequence of those actions, what to do. So like there's a lot of motor planning that's going on in that example that you gave of like running and then making a decision and then which way do you move and shifting your weight. Do you know what I mean? So there's all different types of motor plans. But motor learning is that ability to retrieve that plan. So it's like, how do you retrieve it to then apply it and execute that movement in that specific environment? So I think it's the variability. That's what would help the strategy, because the person needs to experience the strategy in a bunch of different ways to know what plan to execute and how to move in that particular way. So if they've only run past a defender, if I'm using the right terminology, run past a defender in one way, they're only going to know that way to go. So the only way that they're going to be able to learn the right way to do it is by being exposed to a bunch of different environments, a bunch of different stimuli, and a bunch of different variable ways to execute that.
So like, yeah, so what we were saying about Steph Curry versus Cristiano Ronaldo, that motor planning comes with the motor learning, and the motor planning is that subcortical, I guess, plan that is, like you said, retrieved through learning. And so I guess, yeah. So I guess motor planning would just be a subcortical aspect of motor learning.
Yeah. That's how I understand it. Like, they're interrelated. You can't have one without the other.
How do you, so you definitely want to promote at some level you want to promote, like in the beginning, like you said, it's going to be more cognitive. Everything's going to be a little bit more explicitly understood. And then as you keep going, things hopefully become more automatic, and you promote automaticity as you keep learning the skill and the plan and strategy. But I think that like for like at what point, like how do you take that motor plan so you conceptualize it? Yeah, and I guess you just put them in different tasks, and they just have to keep learning which strategy they're going to use.
And which strategy works for them, right? So like, I think it depends on a lot of things. It all depends on how much you can accelerate on your velocity, on like, there's a lot of different things that would impact that, right? And so, like you taught them all the different motor abilities to run past the defender. So they understand how to actually do the skill, but it's the environment that's changing. So it's practice of the variability that would be for them to create different strategies on how to execute that and do that.
And promoting automaticity. So promoting automaticity is key. Is there and you don't want overthinking, and that goes back to the optimum theory. Like you don't want to focus on self, you want to focus on the task. And you, like, at what point do you say, all right, stop thinking? Like you're always told, like you want to tell someone, all right, don't think, just focus on this task. And that's what you want at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. But I feel like it's difficult because at the same time, you want to have some level of awareness of like where you are in space. So you're not it's not really thinking. It's like, you're just very perceptive to your environment during the time, but you're not thinking about it. Like you can see something and you could conceptualize what you're seeing, or you can just be aware. Like I think those are two different things. Like you're aware of you're seeing that, so that helps you can intertwine that in your subcortical processing, and you don't have to think about it, but it's important to be aware without thinking, so be aware of your environment, really see where's your defender as compared to you in space, what's your environment, what's the task right now, but without thinking. And I think that's the juggling act, but you still want to you still want to be aware, because if you're not aware, you won't be able to choose the correct motor task, motor skill. You won't be able to plan.
Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. We're 2 hours and 15 minutes in. I just got so ramped up and excited that we just wanted to keep going. But yeah, that's all we'll do. Just real quick. So I want you to answer this question after. So just one generic statement that everyone could take away from motor learning that you want to talk about, but just real quick, like where's the best place that people can find you and your business?
Yeah. So so on Instagram, if you follow me at Integrated Teaching System, I post motor learning concepts. I relate them to Pilates, but it's really relatable to all forms of movement, of teaching any type of movement. I just relate it to Pilates, and that's why you'll see a lot of Pilates content, but all the concepts are exactly just for teaching movement. So whether you teach basketball or you teach golf or whatever it may be, these concepts can still be applied. And my website at integratedteachingsystem.com, you can find me there. I have some different free resources and stuff that might be interesting and helpful, and blogs, posts. And that's where like my online courses are for my Pilates instructors. Again, it uses Pilates as examples, but all of these concepts really are applicable to teaching any type of movement. And I focus a lot on verbal feedback. And that is what a lot of the courses that are on there currently, and more to come. And yeah, that's where you guys can find me.
And yeah, and you're like really thoughtful about the topic, obviously. So that's definitely tremendously valuable for anybody that wants to go look into that, for sure. And I definitely will.
Thanks.
So one generic statement that you want everybody to take away from learning and motor learning, just one word, one sentence, one phrase, anything.
Yeah. So I think what's really cool about motor learning is, true learning of movement occurs in a layered process. But the sooner you learn that you need to train the brain and not just the body is whenever you're going to see the most success and outcomes with like your patients or your clients or whoever your learner is.
Very nice. Very well put. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been a blast.
Yeah.
And
awesome.
Ange, set it off.
Adios, muchachos.
Very nice.